Societies across the globe have been in a mad rush to develop both commercial and public services digitally. The problem is that there's been far too little concern about the security side of things. So you have digital services with that actually reduce dramatically the security of people's personal data. Clearly, the way to go is to, first of all, to make sure everyone has a secure digital identity, that you have a distributed architecture so that you don't lose everything at one go if you are attacked. And third, you really need to worry about data integrity, having data changed. Those are the three pillars of a secure digital society or of a digital business. And without those, you will always be at risk.
Cybersecurity business is an intelligence business. In order to stay ahead of your adversaries, you need to share information about threats, your weaknesses, etc., etc. It is key that you create these kind of trusted communities where you share information with your friends, with your allies, to stay ahead of the curve.
Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, dear participants of the summit. How should countries make a bigger leap to ensure cybersecurity? We at the EU Agency for Cybersecurity have been observing the incidents that have happened across critical sectors. In 2019, there were 432 incidents with significant impact. In 2020, there were 742 significant incidents. This is an increase of 72%. And our threat landscape tells us that these incidents are going to increase over the years to come. Cybersecurity is a complex matter, and there is no good indicator to tell us whether we are doing the right thing, which will have an impact. But one indicator that we can all observe is the investments. ENISA did a study last year and found out that our operators of essential services invest 41% less as their counterparts in the United States. Driving investments into cybersecurity, into the skills, the knowledge and technology will help us to manage these incidents better and mitigate the impact of these incidents. So it is up to each country and the Union overall to see what kind of incentives have we put into our regulatory and political framework to drive these investments. Thank you.
And now to continue, we have an impressive panel of IT and digital ministers, starting with Minister Andres Suit. Federal Minister for Digital and Economic Affairs of Austria, Margarete Schrambeck. Minister of State for Public Procurement and E-Government of Ireland, Mr. Ossian Smith. Minister for Communications and Information of Singapore, Ms. Josephine Teo. Here we go. And Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport of the United Kingdom, Mr. Oliver Dowden. And our moderator for this discussion is the National Cybersecurity Policy Director of the Republic of Estonia, Mr. Raul Rikk.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Estonia and welcome to the cybersecurity panel. We have a little bit over an hour to discuss about this matter, and I hope that we are going to have a great discussion. So, but first of all, I want to say that it's my real pleasure to be here among all of you, among the leaders, thinkers, and experts whose responsibility is to shape and also secure our digital future. And that's exactly what this panel is about. Regarding the arrangements, we have structured the panel this way, that we have divided it into 3 parts. So first, we will talk about cyber threats and the global cybersecurity landscape. Secondly, we will talk about the measures to improve cybersecurity nationally and also internationally. And finally, we are going to talk about how to make the leap to improve cyber resilience. Because as Minister Sutt mentioned in his speech, the landscape has changed. We have witnessed several different influential cyber attacks around the world. And also what we have seen during the COVID period is that digitalization is fast forward. So people are using more and more digital systems and devices. And so the big question is how to make the leap in order to ensure that our digital future is safeguarded. But before I start with the questions to the panelists, I will share with you the results of an interesting study that was done in Estonia a couple of years ago. So it was the time when we planned a long-term development strategy for the next 15 years in Estonia. And we asked people that how they wanted to see Estonia, what they thought were the most important values that needed to be addressed. And what was surprising was that we got more than 14,000 answers, and the results are here. From the panel side, it's a little bit hard to see the chart, but the audience at least can see. So why I like to show this chart is because the most valued or the most important value seems to be security in Estonia. And of course, working in the cybersecurity side, I like that chart, and these people who are dealing with other areas, they are probably showing other charts where their respective area is the first one. But this shows that cyber and security really matters. But what was also a little bit surprising to us was that efficiency and innovation that is prominent in digital development side is at the end of the chart. It's not in the first place. So it raises the question that do Estonian people really want innovation, or they want more security? I believe that they actually want both. They want innovation, but they want trusted innovation. They don't just want something new, they want something they can rely on. So that's why I think that we need trusted connectivity, as it was discussed in the morning. We need trusted infrastructure, but also we need trusted innovation. And now let's go to the questions. As I mentioned, and as it was in the speech of Minister Sutt as well, so the landscape has changed, we believe so. And the first question is that, I actually put 2 questions together. So first part of the question is that, what has been the most influential cyber incident or a pressing issue in your country recently that has shaped your thinking of cybersecurity and also has shaped the policy of cybersecurity? So a little bit personal touch from your country. And the second part of the question is that how would you describe the current cyber threat landscape nationally and internationally? How do you feel that? We have a little bit shared how we feel about that in Estonia, but what is your kind of like insight or understanding? What is the world we live in these days? And I would like to start with Ireland, because we all know that you suffered the ransomware attacks this year. So maybe you can give a little bit your view on that. So please, Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I live in Ireland. And if you ran that survey that you just showed on the screen and you asked people, what is your primary concern? What kind of Ireland do you want to live in? Security would not be the first item. I can guess that it wouldn't be security. And people do not feel insecure living in Ireland. It is an island on the outermost coast of Europe. And, you know, maybe you don't know, but when the Roman Empire was there, Julius Caesar just did not go as far as Ireland. They just didn't continue that far. So the water around us has been our security, our remoteness, and our lack of money, I suppose, historically as well. So there were a lot of reasons not to come into Ireland. But the big change, I suppose, now is that when you launch a cyber attack, it doesn't matter what country you attack. And it doesn't matter where you are, you can attack it just as easily no matter where that country is in the world. So we're no longer protected by those oceans around us by being remote from other places. And that came home to us in May of this year when Ireland suffered a devastating cyber attack. And at that time, I was the minister responsible for cybersecurity, which nobody knew until that day, the 13th of May. And on that day, I got a phone call very early in the morning to say that our health service had been attacked. The attack was so complete or so devastating that every computer in the entire health service was shut down. Not just the servers, I'm talking about everybody's laptop, every computer in every office within the entire health service. So this is a health service serving 5 million people, 100,000 employees. We give them 22 billion euros to run their service for the year. It's a big operation, shut down completely and reverting to pen and paper. And that has an effect, you know. So this was a criminal attack. It was not espionage. It was not a state actor. It was a criminal gang, and they had left their name on the ransom notes on every machine, and the name of the gang was well known. And we were very quickly contacted by the Polish, and we're very grateful to them for that, because they had direct experience with this particular criminal gang, and they could advise us about what their method of attack was, what their method of operation was, and how to deal with them. So I guess this is certainly the most intense and the most damaging cybersecurity attack in Irish history, but possibly also in European history. So it was a huge attack. The attackers demanded $20 million. I understand they didn't give a ransom in Bitcoin because Bitcoin's a very volatile currency, so they wanted to make sure they got the $20 million worth. But in fact, of course, we paid them nothing. We didn't negotiate with them. But the eventual cost was probably 5 times that amount of money. So although we got all our data back, although they didn't publish any of our data, so the 2 major threats that come with a ransomware attack of publishing your data or destroying your data, we didn't suffer from those things. But despite that, the cost was certainly above $100 million. So that was our experience, and you could say that was a wake-up call and started a political debate about how we protect our vital infrastructure. And my message to you and to any of you who are in this room is that in your own country, you could wake up one morning and find that some element of your critical infrastructure no longer works. You know, some part of it perhaps that you hadn't even thought about. So, you know, your water doesn't work, or your electricity, or your gas isn't flowing, or there's no internet. In our case, it was no healthcare service. That can happen overnight. And all of those vulnerabilities are there. And really, we need to find a way to prevent them, because prevention is always going to be more effective than cure.
Thank you very much. What about Austria? Have you experienced something similar, or you have your own story?
Yes, so first of all, thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here. My first visit as a minister was to Estonia, and I'm happy to be here the second time now. What happened in Austria was, yes, a ministry of ours, so it was the Ministry of External Affairs, was heavily attacked in 2020. So I took some time to get rid of the attack and to solve the issue. So I fully agree with my colleague, so that investment in this early enough is important. I originally come from IT industry, and I've been in ICT for 22 years. I've been selling cybersecurity solutions myself. So I know how often decision makers think now it's not necessary now, and it is so high cost. Of course, it's like an insurance. But today you can be assured that this investment is really good, both from state side and both from companies. In Austria, I'm at the moment, and when I look across Europe, I think it's the same in all countries, also worried about our small and medium-sized companies. So we do have the state, We have state organizations, we have individuals, we have companies, large-sized and small-sized companies. And in Austria, our GDP and our companies, 98% of them are small and medium-sized. So they lack the knowledge and then lack the experience, the IT knowledge that is needed. So this is something where we see attacks increasing. For example, a milk company, a regional milk company was just recently attacked. They couldn't accept the milk from the farmers, they couldn't bring the milk to the people, and you would never have imagined in the past that such a company would have been the target for attackers. But nowadays they are, and it is operational security, especially in production, that needs to help. What can we do? What we did is we have digital innovation hubs, so there is this idea across Europe, and we do a focus here also in cybersecurity. So not only one other part is on AI, artificial intelligence, and the other part is on cybersecurity. Why? Because these small companies, they don't have access always to the bigger IT companies. They don't know how to handle it. So they need in their region, in their area, some point where they can go to and find the people that can help them. And I think this is one of the topics I'm at the moment thinking about the most. How can we help them? What you also did is an investment bonus. So they did now invest into digital during the crisis, they got 14% cash back. So incentives incentivize them to do this first step towards more cybersecurity for them, their employees, their customers, and finally for their survival.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that also the operational security is important. We have seen it in Estonia and elsewhere also that sometimes when we talk about cybersecurity, the kind of like discussion points are only related to the IT companies or telecom companies. And it's very hard to grasp sometimes that every company who uses IT are basically IT company as well. And how to protect them is a really hard, task.
You have it in every machine. We talk about the Internet of Things. It's really there. The more this network is increasing, the more interesting it's, of course, to attack those companies. And they are vulnerable. And therefore, we need to support them on the whole track and have enough people also that are skilled to help them. I think that's the biggest shortage we all have. It's about the skilled people in our countries to solve these issues. So we need more cybersecurity white knights.
Let's jump now far, far away from EU. Let's go to UK. So.
We're not that far.
Yeah, at least 2 hours. But what we think in the smaller countries, that big countries like UK and Germany and United States, they have this great and massive cybersecurity capabilities. Like you have the Cybersecurity Center that probably has at least 10 floors on the ground, and you have these all necessary capabilities that is needed. But what is your understanding, or what is your view on the cybersecurity landscape? Is it gone worse, or is it kind of better than like 2, 3, 4 years ago?
Well, first I would say there's some excellent points being made by my fellow ministers. I'm not surprised, having had an interesting dinner and lunch with them. I thoroughly echo what they've said. Of course, in the United Kingdom, we have the National Cybersecurity Centre working with our intelligence agency, GCHQ, and we've put a lot of money into that. We've put about £2 billion into it. But actually, the real challenge and the bread and butter of cybersecurity is businesses and institutions up and down the country. And when you talk about what is the thing that struck me, clearly there was specific attacks such as SolarWinds, which we, with the United States, attributed. But the real challenge is making people understand this is real for them and it's real for their lives. So if your hospital has outdated IT equipment that leaves it vulnerable, your healthcare records are vulnerable to cyber attack. Your population's health is therefore vulnerable. Your schools are vulnerable if they don't have that in place. And you made the point, Minister, about small businesses. Certainly it's the case that as you go from the largest businesses, which do have quite sophisticated cybersecurity operations, the smaller businesses, it's very challenging to get across to them just some of the most basic fundamentals of cybersecurity. It's a bit like in your own house. It might be an inconvenience, but you will go round and shut your windows and lock the doors before you go out. It's just sort of instinctive. That's what you need to do to protect your house. It is much more of a challenge to get businesses to understand you've got to do the same very basic hygiene. So a couple of the things that I've been focusing on as a minister and the government has been focusing on is, first of all, trying to communicate that message. So an awful lot of what the National Cybersecurity Centre does is working with businesses, working with individuals, actually campaigning to get that message out. But then secondly, trying to put some more hard legislative solutions in place. So for example, we'll shortly introduce secure by design legislation, which will deal with some of those, in sort of crude terms, if you've got a new piece of equipment, you can't automatically have password as your password. It forces you to have a more complex password. And some of those basic steps, so I think if taking a step back to your original point, I think the biggest single challenge is just getting that wake-up call to all businesses and private individuals that this is relevant to them and their own lives.
Thank you very much. And let's go now to the other side of the globe, almost other side, to Singapore. So we are very happy to have Minister of Economy and IT Communications all together in Estonia. So maybe you can share your views from the other side of the world, that how you think about cybersecurity and cyber threat landscape.
Good afternoon. I'm Josephine Teo from Singapore, and I'm very honored to be here. Singapore is a great admirer of Estonia for the high degree of digital transformation that you have been through, and I'm very happy to participate in the Tallinn Digital Summit. Friends from Estonia and around the world who know Singapore will appreciate that our population has become very used to a high degree of safety and security. And so we often say that as women and as parents, we have no fear about even our daughters coming home at 3 a.m. in the morning, because the risk to their lives and safety are very, very minimal. And with that kind of a backdrop, then the understanding, awareness, and concern about cybersecurity is also very low. And in fact, cybersecurity threats we've had to deal with for many years, but it was only as recently as, say, 3 years ago, in 2018, that it captured the public imagination. As it turns out, in that year, what happened was that our healthcare system was breached, and about 1.5 million health records were exfiltrated. They were stolen. They also included some records of medicines that were dispensed in the outpatient clinic. Now, once that incident happened, all of a sudden, people in Singapore realized that what could happen in cyberspace was both dangerous, not only to the organizations who hold data, but it could also compromise their personal privacy. And with that, I think over these last 3 years, the degree of understanding has improved greatly. Be that as it may, I think we recognize that cybersecurity can be said to be a wicked problem. It is a wicked problem in the sense that it is not something you can solve once and for all, because of several factors. One is that in dealing with cybersecurity risks, there is great asymmetry. Those of us who have to operate systems have to be flawless in terms of how we defend the system's security. But for those who are trying to attack the system, they only need to find one flaw. They only need to find one vulnerability, and they're through. One other problem is the fact that cybersecurity risks are borderless. They can come from any direction. And yet another problem is that it's very difficult to identify good quality forensic evidence to be able to do attribution. Now, these problems haven't gone away, and in more recent times, we are dealing also with supply chain kinds of breaches and ransomware. It is big business. There is ransomware as a service. And it's quite clear also that it's no longer the information infrastructure that is at risk. Much of the information infrastructure is also connected to ops technology infrastructure. So when we hear about the breaches for Colonial Pipeline, it is not just the information system that was at risk, it was the whole operations that was put at risk. And of course, last year with COVID, we also saw that there were vulnerabilities that were being exploited. For example, vaccine supply and distribution, and stealing of data that was being produced as part of R&D efforts. What this has done for us in Singapore is to change our cybersecurity posture. The approach that we now take is to assume that breaches are going to happen. It's just a question of when. It's not a question of if. And since it is a question of just when and not if, then there are three aspects of it that we want to be able to put in place and strengthen in order to become more cyber resilient. The first is that we assume that many of our systems are already breached. And what it means is, apart from what Oliver says, going around and making sure that the windows and doors are locked, it is assuming that before we manage to close them, something has already entered into our system, and there needs to be constant vigilance, constant monitoring to try and identify them. That's the first thing that we try to do. The second thing is that apart from trying to prevent breaches, the idea is also that we must put in place the standard operating procedures, the response mechanisms, as it were, in the event that a breach does occur. How do we then recover quickly from that breach in order that the systems can continue to run? This is particularly important for us in governments because as governments, we are in the business of delivering essential services and our citizens are counting on us. So the last thing they want to see when a breach has happened is that you are unable to recover from it. So we owe it to them in order to be able to do so. So that is the second thing that we do. Plan for recovery in order that we have a more resilient system. The third is also then to consider very carefully, in the event of a breach, what is the public communications approach and how do we maintain trust with our citizens? What is it that we will be able to tell them in terms of the details of the breach and also the kind of actions that are being taken to recover from that breach? So I would say that our posture has changed from one of just trying to prevent the breaches, but to one that assumes that a breach has already occurred and how we can be more resilient in terms of the recovery. And that is something that perhaps we would also be very happy to discuss with other countries on how you are approaching this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's come back now to Estonia. And I have to admit that I'm very happy that Minister Sutt has raised this cybersecurity expenditure question, because then I hope that some part of this money will come down to my salary as well. But we can talk about the salary a little bit later. I would like to ask you, Minister, Estonia 2007 attacks has been widely spoken, and very often people refer to that as one of the biggest and first cyber wars that took place. But after that, what has happened after 2007? So what significant vulnerabilities have we had? And maybe you can a little bit describe it more specifically, that how we understand what is the cyber threat world landscape at the moment. Please.
Yes, thank you, Raul. I think it's good to have a negotiation over salary on the stage. That is always something what gives tangible outcomes. Which way, we shall see. Of course, you're right. with 2007 attacks, I think that the whole topic was raised to attention globally. And that is a bit what we do here today. In Estonia, in a big picture, and of course most of these, 14 years, or say 13 years, I have been observer or a user of services. For the last 7 or 8 months, I have been also in charge and of course accountable for cybersecurity at the central level. And it is a different feeling. It has been a relative calmity, I think, in Estonia in general. Although we had the ID card crisis, we had now recently in the summer 2 leaks of or unauthorized access to personal data. I mean, both these incidents didn't result in any dramatic consequence. But I think it very much proves a point what Josephine was just making. We need to assume that we are constantly attacked, and some of the attacks are successful. I mean, there are about 300 attacks every day in Estonia. And this panel is not really to freak you out, but rather to raise the level of awareness. I mean, you don't want to receive this call what Ocean was receiving in the morning, that the system is down. I have been receiving these calls in my previous career in the banking industry, and you don't want to receive them. And then this is precisely where you start to prepare. You start to prepare for an event what you don't exactly know how it unfolds, but you are better prepared. And I think this is really important. And again, this is not only public business here. It's equally in any of a private side. And I'm very thankful for you, Margaret, that you raised also this parallel from your previous career in telecom industry. But there is this, I think, a human nature that you want to invest more into development, to grow a business, and then think, okay, these accidents happen actually elsewhere. They don't never occur to me. It was a bit like with the banking crisis. Oh, this happens in other countries. I mean, we are different. That doesn't really relate to us. But the day will come. And that actually, if you are not prepared, you get hurt. So that's why, and my reading of a landscape today, and again, sort of, maybe this is a bit related to a short period in the business, but I see the world becoming increasingly hostile in the cyberspace. And there are a number of incidents occurring here and elsewhere. And that's why I also appreciate very, very deeply that you took your time, you came here, and you shared your experience from the stage. Because if I would have been telling here alone to the Estonian audience and saying, look, yeah, in 2007 we had a big thing, then we had the ID card crisis, and then some minor things here and there. Is it really serious threat? I think it's very, very important that we share the experience and we talk openly. And of course, the communication is critical. I mean, if we talk about trust, which has been one of the key themes in this event, it's also about transparency. We need to report and disclose, of course, in the right time when things went wrong. So, and Estonia, as we have been in a leading position, I see also our duty to carry this leading position forward and to take these initiatives and to get this sort of a global agreement on how we define the investment in cyber security or cyber defense, and what is the right benchmark as a level of IT budget. In FTEs, because it's cross-cutting. And again, as I said in the speech, we will see trillions invested in digitalization of the world, which is all good thing for the benefit of people, but it has to be complemented with investment in cybersecurity. Otherwise, next time we will share many experiences, how things actually exploded, went through. Oh, we are not going to share. It will be other people who will share. But then we need to look into a mirror. Did we do our job? So that's why I think it's important we discuss it here. We allocate the resources. We do a lot of international cooperation. And then we can tell also the stories where we learned, and then we can be safe in the digital domain.
Thank you very much. I believe that we can all agree that the landscape has changed. So the dependency of digital systems are higher, and also the threats are more influential, let's say so. So let's move to the next topic. What is the national and global cybersecurity measures? So what should be done in order to deal with this situation, in order to face the cyber threats and be certain that we can be in the safe side? So my second question is that what do you think, is there a silver bullet that can solve all the cybersecurity problems? And I know that many of you will answer immediately that no, there is not. But in Estonia, we have experienced something like that when we implemented ID card, electronic ID. It reduced the amount of cyber incidents a lot. So we didn't need to deal with incidents that many other countries had to. And later, we also implemented the X-road system, what is the secure way of exchanging information. And that was a very good solution as well. So it seems to be that there are some solutions that help a lot, but of course they are not sufficient. So I would expand the question a little bit the way that when you answer that, what are the measures should be taken, maybe you can also indicate that from which sector or which area you see that the solution or the best solution could come. Is it regulatory matters? Is it technology? Or is it cooperation? Or where is the solution hiding itself somewhere? So let's start again with Ireland, please.
Well, I think the most important thing is education, and I said that prevention is better than cure. It's cheaper and more effective than cure, and really there's a parallel between the coronavirus, the pandemic, and the way that we tackle that, and the way that we tackle a computer virus attacking our systems. We could not deal with the pandemic at the hospital. We had to do it at the prevention stage, and that meant very basic health interventions like washing your hands or wearing a mask, and then later on getting vaccinated. So these were the approaches that were taken, a lot of them on an individual level. And the same thing applies with computer security. There is the idea of security hygiene. And these things that have to be done are very basic and simple, and they're a matter of education, and they're a matter of habit. And they're things that you have to get your organizations, your critical infrastructure organizations, have to follow those habits and have to do those things, because if they don't do them, it's going to be very expensive for them when a bad thing happens. And I described how the cost of the attack on our health service was far larger than the ransom that was being looked for, but that doesn't address the fact that it also damaged patient health. When the patients can't get to their medical records, when the doctors can't access the medical records quickly, when they can't see the lab test results, there is a delay, and the time inevitably is going to lead to bad patient outcomes, people becoming sick or people dying. And we haven't quantified what that effect was so far. So I should underline that this was not just a financial problem. It was much worse than that. So what can we do to prevent it in future? I think, as Josephine said, you have to accept that you can never prevent an attack from ever happening or any system from being compromised. One thing that every organization should be doing is trying to penetrate their own network, or trying to find ways to see if it is possible to get in. And one of the common things that are done is that an email is sent to everybody in the organization, inviting them to click on a link and see how many people click the link. And first you teach everybody not to click the links from emails they don't recognize. You send everybody that email. And even in a very advanced organization, like a top tier IT company, probably 5% of people will still click that link in the end. So you're going to have penetration. You're going to have somebody getting through to one of the machines. One of the employees in your system is going to allow something to get onto their machine. And the question is then, assuming that your network is going to be breached, how far and how fast can they travel within that network undetected? So once an attacker is inside your system, are they just going to be able to move all around with freedom and destroy everything that's in there? And that's something that you can prevent, is putting in those layers of security within the system. So I guess, you know, we do have a framework. We have the NIS directive from the EU, and that has really, in a structured way, has tried to think about all these problems. The second NIS directive is coming out shortly, and that tries to do things like assess what are all the critical infrastructure in your country. Are you educating the people who run that infrastructure? Are they properly resourced? When an incident happens, do they have an emergency team to come out to them and help them? And are lessons learned when those incidents happen? Is the information fed back in to make the system more resilient afterwards? I know that our health system is now going to be a lot stronger and more resilient afterwards. I'm just sorry that that was the way that it happened. But I can also say that it's not just Ireland. I see these attacks in the largest, most well-resourced countries. So you saw the petrol supplies, gasoline supplies to 3 US states shutting down with the Colonial Pipeline. You saw the supply chain problems in Sweden, and there have been breaches in every major economy. So it really can happen to you. It can happen to any country.
But may I ask that, can you list like 3 most important things that has changed now in Ireland? Or what have you done after the incident?
I guess the first is education. The first is teaching people about, you know, how they have to behave. The second thing, of course, is disaster recovery. You must have a structured disaster recovery system. People must be testing that they can repair a machine, a legacy system, if the power is turned off, or if the machine goes on fire, is taken away. There must be somebody who can rebuild that machine in a hurry if you assume that a disaster can happen. And lastly, I would say as well that we did do forensic analysis of the break-in. We did have the police involved. Our police force have managed in the last few days to shut down a number of websites that belonged to the people who they believe to be the attackers. And I know that the police logo has appeared on those websites, and I know that they've done this with the assistance of other international police forces. I want to thank the Americans and the British as well, particularly for that help. So, you know, when the attack happened at first, people said there's no point in getting the police involved. What chance do the Irish police have of being able to trace these international attackers who could be anywhere in the world? But in fact, we have made progress, and we have issued orders to shut their a number of bank accounts as well. So don't give up on that avenue as well, is what I'd say.
Thank you. Now let's go to Austria. What do you think should EU do? What are the most important measures that should be taken throughout the Union in order to ensure and maintain cybersecurity, but also looking forward to the future to make sure that nothing happens with our digital systems?
Well, it has already been pointed out. I think it's a common approach. It's something we need to do commonly, not only EU, but all European countries, also the UK, so that we work together across borders. This is something we need to do very, very intensively, and this is also something Austria is prepared to contribute and to be part of this, because it's something we cannot solve isolated in the different countries. So what we do is that first we need this networking and bring the best brains in this area to one table, working together across organizations, across ministries, and also involve the private sector, but because there is a lot of knowledge in there. Then second, we need this on the European level, and then on a worldwide level, because we should not forget we are now talking about a lot about the human being in cybersecurity, and it all boils down to humans doing different things. It's not the machines that are doing this, but it's humans' intentions doing something bad to a company, an organization, and so on. So it's all about the skills, as we have said. The skill set needs to increase in Austria, in Europe, in the UK, in Estonia, everywhere. And we need to invest a lot in that, starting from school, but also to adults, because a lot of us, I'm born 97, so I was not a digital native. So, some of the people who sit here, they are digital natives and others are not. So the human being is always at the core of this risk, I would say also, doing something which is putting your password on your PC. Yeah? We would be surprised how many are still using this, or the password is so difficult, I can not remember it, so I'm writing it down somewhere else. So it all starts about this around the human being. So if we educate people, they can first be aware of the risk, and second, help also to prevent a lot of the risks which are around there. But there is a second perspective to it, and it's the geopolitical. And I think we are a political round, and we have to discuss also this. There are groups, and we have done a survey that we assume that in Austria at least 25, maybe more, % of the attacks are at least known or supported by states. So we need to discuss this topic on a geopolitical level, and it is there. So we need a level playing field, and as Europe, we need to be a strong partner and a strong challenger also for our democratic and also our values, as has been pointed out today, both by the US and also European representatives, and that we have to stand here close together. Because if you go into the darknet, it's incredible how easily you can buy these services. You can buy it with a guaranteed reaction time of 24 hours, with a service report that you get. Some companies cannot issue a service report, but you get a service report, and a success guarantee with a payback guarantee if the attacker is not successful. So this is a parallel universe, it's a parallel business with organized crime and some states behind it, and I think we need to pull here all our resources of democratic and countries together and work together across borders to find the attackers, and also to find agreements also on a political level that this should really stop.
Thank you very much. Thank you for raising the question about geopolitical measures. I would like to ask the same thing from UK, that how do you see that? What are the geopolitical measures that should be taken by the like-minded countries, democratic countries, in order to avoid and prevent non-democratic countries influencing us too much? Or the first example that pops in my mind is, of course, 5G security that we have been discussing together with UK and EU over the last 2 years. But of course, there are other examples as well. So please.
Yes, I would start just by making a slightly broader point. And it struck me from the polling where it said that Estonian citizens wanted to feel secure online. I think actually we have to also acknowledge it's not just about cybersecurity. People want to feel secure in terms of sharing their data. That's why all the conversations about data sharing with trust have been so important. And I think people also, and acutely, this is a political issue in democratic countries, want their children to feel safe online. And so holding social media companies to account in terms of making sure it's a secure environment for children and vulnerable people to be able to access services online is really important about building that wider sense of trust in being online. And I think that's how a lot of our citizens view security in that broader context. On the point about cooperating internationally, I think it's absolutely essential. I think we've made some important steps forward. I think the first thing we need to do is actually to properly attribute attacks and do it in a cautious, careful way, but when we have built up the evidence, working with our allies, working with the United States, working with the European Union and member state police forces and the agencies, if we've got that evidence, we should be going out there and saying who's responsible. And I think in the past there has been a little bit of a reluctance to do that, but I think increasingly we are doing that. I think it's very important to send a signal that we're aware of this stuff is happening and we're not going to turn a blind eye to it. And of course, it's very much a scale from active hostile state activity through to turning a blind eye, through to allowing malicious actors to operate with greater impunity in those countries than they would in ours. So I think we have to work across that spectrum. And by the way, we also have to work in conjunction to make sure that we are willing to respond when necessary, or at least that we have the capability to be able to respond. I think in terms of the broader questions about individual governments, I think part of this is actually looking at our basic infrastructure. So certainly in the United Kingdom, and I think this is in common in many other countries, some of our public services really badly need to update their physical IT infrastructure. Some of it is very dated and leaves them very vulnerable. So there's a need for investment in respect of that. I echo the comments that have been made by my fellow panelists in relation to both awareness. People need to know it's a problem, and then they have to have the skills to be able to address it as well. And those skills, I think, get more challenging as you get to individuals and smaller organizations. And I think, again, that's where there is a bigger role for individual governments to play a role in terms of making sure, not only do you have to make sure that citizens and small businesses know that there's a problem, there's no good just saying there's a problem, you've also got to say, what are you going to do to address it? So I think you have to look at the full spectrum from the very hard end of direct hostile state right the way through to very low-level malicious activity by low-level criminal activity in individual states. And unless you have a full spectrum response, you're not going to deal with it effectively.
Thank you very much. What do you think in Singapore? What are the main national and international measures that should be taken? And maybe you can give a little bit insight. What is the thoughts and ideas in your region in Asia?
I will do that, but let me start by building on Ossian's point right at the beginning of this segment, where he talked about the importance of education, and Margaret also dealt with it. The question for us is, what do we educate people on? Certainly skills are important, certainly awareness is important. But in our context, I think the single most important thing we wanted to educate people on is that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. It is certainly the responsibility of Andreas, myself, Oliver, as ministers in charge of cybersecurity. But our efforts alone isn't going to hack it. Let's face it, the attack surfaces are very, very broad. The shared responsibility must start with the individuals. You said when you were giving your speech at the end, change your password regularly. That's one way of exercising personal responsibility. Ossian gave the example of exercises that are done, penetration testing in organizations. Don't click if you're not supposed to click. Things like that, I think, are important. And beyond individuals, I think enterprises, businesses, must also accept that it is their responsibility to their customers, to their stakeholders, to do a good job of managing cybersecurity. Margaret had talked about how small businesses have become even more digitalized because of COVID. In Singapore, that is also our experience. We polled our businesses, and about 8 in 10 of them said at the beginning of this year that their digitalization efforts were being advanced by at least 2 years. That's very significant. But as they are taking advantage of the opportunities that the digital domain offers them, are they at the same time doing more in terms of safeguarding their digital assets? And our impression is that at this point in time, it is not adequate in terms of the efforts that they have put in. Then that goes to the question of how can we help them to do a better job? And there are at least 2 things we think are worth doing. Number one is to address the issue of a skills gap. Because for many of the small and medium enterprises, how they can protect themselves better in cyberspace is really a big question. They don't quite know how to do it. So what we are doing is developing a toolkit that will make it easier and much more a step-by-step approach for the smaller businesses so that they can protect themselves. The other thing is that we are trying to work out a trust mark system. If we can have a trust mark and let people go through an accreditation process, then in that process, they will be educated about what are the cyber hygiene practices to put in place. And the bigger value of it is that the efforts that they put in can be recognized by their customers, and as a result of that, it is a worthwhile investment. So those are the two practical things that we can do for businesses in terms of them becoming more cyber ready. But beyond the enterprise level responses, there is also the importance of responding as a nation. So apart from being able to draw up a national cybersecurity strategy, I think we have to recognize that our economies are quite diverse, and to believe that one central agency will have all the answers to cybersecurity is probably unrealistic. In our case in Singapore, we decided that we have to think of our economy as having many different sectors. There's financial services, there's healthcare sector, there's the logistics sector. And each one of these sectors have got agencies that are promoting the development in those sectors. In these sector agencies, they are also much more tightly coupled and connected to the business community in these sectors. And it is better for them to develop sector-specific types of responses that take into consideration the idiosyncratic features of those sectors. Financial services, there is so much money flowing around, and the systems are much more sophisticated. Then the cybersecurity measures will also have to be a higher notch. Healthcare is a different kind of issue. Logistics, a different kind of issue. So a sector-specific approach is how we are dealing with it. And making sure that the message of shared responsibility is also known to the sector agencies. We were talking about this at dinner last night, that if and when a situation occurs, the sector agencies have to be at the front and center of it, helping to deal with it, and cannot be just leaving it to the cybersecurity agencies. Now then I want to turn to your very important question, international cooperation. Here we see two themes that are particularly important. In the analog world, particularly for small states like Singapore, we've been able to benefit from a rules-based multilateral order. Is there the same rules-based multilateral order in cyberspace? I think that is a question that has to be asked. And if cyberspace does not have a rules-based multilateral order, how is it possible for us to be able to carve out a reasonable space for ourselves in order to create a digital future that our citizens deserve? So that is one particular theme where international cooperation is very key. Credit to Estonia, you brought cybersecurity to the UN Security Council at the highest level. Beyond that, there are UN entities that are discussing how the norms have to be created, and we are participating actively in this conversation too. There is, for example, the open-ended working group, and Singapore was asked to consider chairing the open-ended working group earlier this year. We considered it very carefully. We asked if we could make a reasonable contribution to trying to advance the agenda, and with the help and support of many of our like-minded partners, we've decided that it is a contribution we must try to make. So over the next 5 years, we will be working with colleagues like yourselves to try and see whether we can emerge and cause to emerge a stronger consensus through the open-ended working group. Finally, I think there is another theme in international cooperation that we must try to foster, and that is capacity building. I was discussing with some of my colleagues in ASEAN. There are 10 member states. obviously at very different levels of development, and each one also hoping to carve out a digital future for ourselves. And yet at the same time, recognizing that there are many risks. But the ability to counter those risks in cybersecurity is not the same. So what we did was to set up with ASEAN a cybersecurity center of excellence that hopes to be able to bring together the experts to conduct training and to try and establish baseline capabilities in dealing with cyber threats. One of the very important things that we need to do is to share information and give each other the heads up when we notice that certain of our systems are under siege. This goes to what ASEAN was also saying, the example that you gave. How can the police, actually be able to deal with this effectively? Well, they can deal with it, provided they have mechanisms for information sharing. And that's exactly what we are doing in the ASEAN context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Sut, you mentioned in your speech that you stay up at night because of the cybersecurity concern. So what we, as your cybersecurity team, could do in order that you could have a better sleep?
Not sleep while having an accident. That is the first thing. But I think I will just jump back for a second to the debate we have here. And I think what really came out very strikingly is how interconnected people and world at large is. So I think there was a very strong agreement that education, the first line of defense is an individual behind the screen. And how strong is this first line of defense depends how skilled, knowledgeable this person is. And that skill set, and I think even more importantly, the mindset. This starts from school, starts at home, in your organization. And then you move up and you reach out to reach to the level of what is the degree of global collaboration, what is the geopolitical part of it, which I think is important because we need to make sure that digital domain is like very nicely put, it needs to be based on a rules-based framework, like we have for many international affairs, or at least supposed to have. So, and this is really critically important. And then if we get these things in place, and we have a good monitoring capability, and we have a good response team, and we have recovery plans, what are tested and tested again and tested again, not only in government services, but also in the private sector. If I'm still a minister at the time, then I sleep peacefully. Until then, I think we need to sleep as well, but really to push this agenda forward. It is a common exercise. And I think what also came out from the Irish example, we need to make it crystal clear. If there is a cyber attack, it is a criminal offense and there is a consequence. There should be zero tolerance for anybody walking away. And for that it is important that we really have a good collaboration between the institutions and the countries. Otherwise it will be all very difficult. But there are good examples already, and I'm confident and we will also play our part to make it work.
Thank you very much. In Estonia, we say that we don't need the capability to deal with cyber incident well. We want to avoid cyber incidents from happening. So that's, of course, the basis, the idea to have the sufficient investments to the cybersecurity sector. But now moving to the last part, and we have about 11 minutes left. What do you think about this idea to set a clear goal for cybersecurity expenditure from the ICT budget, for example, some kind of percentage? And if you don't agree with this initiative or this idea, where do you see is what is the key factor or key thing that we should do in order to make the leap to the more resilient cyberspace? So who wants to start?
I will, and I'll be quick. So I'm not going to reject the suggestion out of hand. We will consider it. But my problem with any type of measure like this, which says you must spend this much money or you must do this much effort, is that it's an input measure and not an output measure. So it's a target for what you put into a system rather than the results. And I would want to see that. The money is really important. I think it's important to attack the business model of cyber criminals, and that means not paying them money. I was really disturbed to see that an American insurance company had paid a ransom of $40 million. And you can imagine that goes a long way towards setting up your evil empire and your customer service desk and all the things you need for your they're going to launch a lot of more attacks with that $40 million. We immediately said when we were attacked that there was no chance we would ever pay any money at all. And it really does help. Like if we go down that road of paying money to get out of problems, it damages things. Clearly the cryptocurrency isn't helping us in that regard. It's helping to hide transactions, but we really need to cut off the money supply as early as possible. It's important to have baseline standards for critical infrastructure, that people are risk assessed, that they're assessed externally, that they're told these are the things that you're falling down on, you must do these things, and if you are attacked and you haven't done these things, then you'll be held to account because we told you in advance that those things are there. So you need to have a form of audit on cybersecurity. You need to have an open approach to assessing what's there at a calm time when you're not being attacked. And just to go back again, as Andre says, being able to rebuild your systems, taking the time when it's a quiet time to be able to rebuild a system, from the ground up as quickly as possible, in a military precision, it makes you strong. That means when somebody says, we've stolen your computers, you say, that's fine, I can just build them again from my backups, and your backups are off-site and they're disconnected. You must have that. And that's one of the reasons people pay money, is because they know that the attackers have managed to destroy their backups, or they haven't done their backups, or they don't trust their ability to rebuild their systems.
Can I just jump in on that? There is a lot of alignment in how you are thinking about the problem as we are. If we are asked as a government, as the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, we've been asked to pay a ransom, what should we do? Our advice to the companies is, in fact, not to pay the ransom, exactly for the same reasons as you described, because it becomes very lucrative for the cyber criminals. And there is no guarantee that you will get your data back. There is no guarantee that you will be able to restore your systems, But to the broader question of whether there should be a budget set aside, I think the answer is yes. But as to what budget ought to be set aside, I have sympathy for organizations not being able to secure the resources that they need in order to do a good job of cybersecurity. And so I can appreciate that if you say that there is a baseline budget, that is something at least, that creates a basis for discussion with the board. Otherwise, how is the poor chap, who is tasked with this enormous responsibility going to discharge it adequately? So I have sympathy for that. But on the other hand, I feel that at the senior level of organizations, there must be a stronger understanding of your own unique risk profile. It is a failure of the board level leadership if they are unable to appreciate the extent of risk that the organization is bearing and unable to master the right resources in order to protect their digital assets. So from that perspective, it does not seem clear to me how a fixed number is going to do the trick. I think it can be a starting point for a conversation, it can be a reference point, but beyond that, there must be enough management and leadership accountability in order to set the right amount. The other important consideration, I think, is that we don't want to encourage a compliance-based mindset, which is that if we have set aside this amount, tick box, it's done. We actually prefer organizations to take a risk-based approach, in that whatever it's the budget that they have set aside, they have to see how best to put it to the good use. What are the most prominent risks that they are trying to address, and how can the resources that they are setting aside best address those risks? So those would be my contributions.
So same is true for us, and of course this can be discussed, and it is an idea that we have to consider. At the same time, it is, as my colleague said, we need to work with best practices, and what costs the most money is not often, or is not always the best solution. So only spending money for the sake of spending money is not the key. But at the same time, if we do also the second step and we share the best practices, we do not reinvent the wheel again and again, because by the experience you have made, we can learn, and vice versa. So I think this sharing capability of sharing solutions and sharing innovation in cybersecurity is really key. We need to speed up the process, therefore I agree, we need money and we need it in all different areas, but we also need to be very careful where we invest it, and as long as we take all people with us on this road, I think this is one of the most important topics. Yeah? It is from the political people that are responsible in politics to business people, to the employee, and also to students and school kids. We should all take them with us on this journey and not leave certain groups behind or certain regions behind. So it is a common effort that we need to do.
Yes, well, I think it's an interesting idea, and it's certainly a good way of challenging us. I think it works much better when it's direct government action. So, for example, NATO has a 2% target, and you can be pretty confident that the 2% a nation spends on its defence translates broadly into defence outputs. When you're looking at collaboration between the government and private sector, and as Josephine said, well, you need different solutions in different sectors, it becomes much more challenging. I certainly agree with the point about not paying for ransoms. It's the case that we've never paid ransoms for when humans are taken as hostages, so it seems extraordinary that we should be willing to do it in defence of cyber capabilities. But I thought the very interesting point that you made, Andres and Josephine, was about the rules-based international order. And I think if you look back in past times, whether it's setting accountancy standards at the end of the 19th century, or whether it's working for common defence and security after the Second World War, there is this challenge for open, democratic countries that believe in the rule of law, believe in transparency, believe in openness, to come together to set the rules of the game between themselves and then to essentially export those globally. And I think that we have rather failed in the digital age to properly come together to set those rules. And I think we have allowed countries that don't quite share our values to set the pace a bit on this. And I think one of the biggest single challenge for me is how we come together as like-minded countries to set that rules-based framework, so that, as we all know, the 21st century will be the data and digital century. There's a real challenge for us to make sure that the values that underpin it are our values of openness, transparency, democracy, rule of law. And if we fail that challenge, I think the consequences, not just in cyber, but more broadly, will be very, very alarming for us.
Thank you very much. So
yes, Raul, I will also give a quick reflection. I know 1 minute and 40 seconds, so I will be.
Exactly.
I take 40, and you have a minute. I'm very glad it already provoked a debate, and this is precisely what we need. We need to have a good discussion going forward, how we can better manage and measure the outputs. I fully agree that should be the end goal. And again, it's not that one size fits all. It is about finding, I very much like the risk-based approach. I think that is precisely what we need. So let's keep the ball or get the ball rolling and see how far and how quickly we get. And that, I think, is also a contribution to restoring or to strengthening the rules-based international order what is in favor of democracy, liberal values, and that is also applicable in a cyber domain. Back to you, Raul.
Thank you. And thank you very much for all panelists, because we are very happy that we had 5 ministers who are responsible of cybersecurity in their countries here discussing about this broader picture and also the idea that we put on the table. So, and also thank you that you physically came here. It was really a pleasure to meet people face to face. And let's hope that the autumn that we're going to have ahead is not change that. So thank you all the audience as well, that you were here and took part of the discussion. This basically concludes the cybersecurity panel. So thank you very much and have a nice day.